Hi guys, I am here with chapter 5 of the Hardy Boys, the Viking Symbol Mystery. This book is from the 60s. So a lot of these terms in the book you want to think about from the 60s perspective. Like when chapter 4 when we was talking about stone ruins and stuff, stone tablets. Or tablets, sorry, not stuff I'm talking about in my head. Tablets, when they're talking about tablets, finding tablets and things. That's not like the tablets we have today. These are like stone tablets, like the Ten Commandments and stuff. Tablets made of stone. Computers weren't even thought of back in the 60s. Alright, so let's read chapter 5, and chapter 5 is called Detective's Double. Alright, nose is starting to run. At the name Peter Baker Jones, Joe was instantly alert. The man in the Edmonton hospital, he recalled. The one who bought the ruined stone and was knocked out. And now a valuable book by Baker Jones was missing from the Bayport library. "Are you still on the line?" Mrs. Shannon's voice broke into his thoughts. "Oh, sorry," Joe apologized. "Frank and I don't have the book, but I'd like very much to know who took it." "So would we," the librarian said sadly. "Well, I thought I'd just ask you about it to make sure." Joe said goodbye and replaced the telephone in its stand. He walked back slowly to the living room. "What's up?" Frank asked, seeing the puzzled look on his brother's face. Quickly, Joe explained. "This means," Frank said excitedly. Wait, I think I skipped a page. No, I didn't. "Quickly," Joe explained. "This means," Frank said excitedly, "there's someone else here in Bayport who's interested in the missing ruined stone. If the book was stolen, that is." "I have a hunch it was," Joe stated. "Frank, do you think Kelly could have this something to do with his case, as well as the one Radley has been working on?" "He certainly could. And the book may be just what the thieves need to figure out the runic symbols." Just then the doorbell rang. It was Chet. The Hardys told him about Mrs. Shannon's call. Chet listened carefully, then said, "I looked over the complete collection of Viking books, and I don't remember seeing that title. The one by Baker Jones must have been taken before I was there, which could have been before our Ariel was pulled down," Frank said. "By this time the book might be in Canada." "Maybe you'll know for sure the day after tomorrow," came Mr. Hardy's voice from the doorway. "You mean we'll leave for Edmonton then?" Joe asked excitedly. "Yes," the detective said, "that we had overheard the boys' discussion of the missing book. So I think you three had better get started north and see what you can learn from Mr. Baker Jones," the detective concluded with a smile. "That'll be our first step," Frank said. The boys stayed up talking about their trip and speculating on the mysteries until Chet began to yawn. "I'd better get all the sleep I can now," Chet defended himself. "I'll probably won't get a wink in the wilderness." With that, he left for home. The next morning after breakfast, Frank and Joe drove again to the airport. First they made plane reservations for their trip, then met Jack Wayne for more float plane lessons. The pilot took them up for some aerobatics. The boys took turns trying loops, steep banks, and rolls, getting the feel of the aircraft with the extra weight hanging underneath. They stopped for lunch, then returned to the plane. Frank and Joe each made 6 takeoffs and landings. By the end of practice, Jack said they were skilled enough to pass the FAA proficiency test next day. "What about floating debris on night landings?" asked Frank. "There's nothing you can do about that," Wayne laughed. "If you're landing in a strange lake or river, you just have to take a chance there isn't any." That night, each of the boys shot 6 landings. Though they had done it often during the day, they found the experience an eerie one. "Just decrease your speed until the plane begins to fall, and maintain the 3-point attitude, Wayne instructed. Give yourselves lots of room to come down flying. The only secret is to cut your throttle the moment the floats skim into the water. After a late snack, the Hardys packed, then went to bed. They were tired from the full day's flying and wanted to be awake to leave early the next day. Frank and Joe arose, greatly refreshed. They were just finishing breakfast when Chet arrived. The 3 boys were given last-minute advice and fond hugs by Aunt Gertrude, then were driven to the seaplane dock by Mr. and Mrs. Hardy. There, the brothers took the FAA test, which they passed with flying colors, and had SES for single-engine seaplane inscribed on their licenses. Then Mr. and Mrs. Hardy drove the boys to the airport. After checking the luggage, Frank, Joe, and Chet shook hands with the detective. Sorry, I forgot to mute that. They shook hands with the detective. Good luck on your part of the mystery, boys, he said. Be on your guard every minute. It'll be checking with you. Right, Dad, Joe said, and Frank added, We'll get on the case as soon as we land. Chet grinned, that's for sure. Mrs. Hardy, although always a bit worried when her son set off on a new mission, smiled as she kissed them all goodbye. Do take care of yourselves, she cautioned. A few minutes later, the boys boarded the silver jetliner for Edmonton. By noon, the plane was over Winnipeg, and the passengers could see the wide prairies below. The flight had been smooth so far. Joe was seated next to the window, enjoying the magnificent view. Frank and Chet were reading the flight guide pamphlets. The stillness was broken by an announcement over the loudspeaker. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Because of bad weather and turbulence over Edmonton, we are landing at Saskatoon. The delay probably will be overnight, but the stewardesses will give you complete details of your departure time and accommodations. Please fasten your seatbelts. Within minutes, the stewardesses had checked the passengers' belts, and the jetliner began its descent. Frank pointed out the illustrations in the pamphlet of Saskatoon and the Canadian Air Force training craft stationed there. As they dropped over the runway, Joe leaned close to the window for a better view. There's one of the training planes now. He pointed to a dark gray craft landing on a parallel runway. At that moment, there was a swoosh, and the jetliner leveled out and the wheels caught the field. Joe craned his neck to watch the gray plane. Suddenly there was a loud swish and a bang, and the tire of the jet's starboard side blew out. The plane rocked violently to one side. Wham! Joe was thrown against the window, hitting his head on the frame. He saw swirling lights, and everything went black. When Joe opened his eyes and things began to come back into focus, he looked up into the face of a stewardess who was dabbing his forehead with a cold, wet cloth. What happened? He asked, dazed. You hit your head, the girl said, looking concerned. Are you all right? I think I am now, Joe said, grinning. No permanent dents. Don't scare us like that again, boy, said Frank, as he and Chet smiled in relief. That'll teach me to look out the window when we're landing. Joe ruefully rubbed his throbbing head. When they disembarked, the 3 boys were directed to a modern Saskatoon hotel. En route, they made a tour of the city and saw its mammoth grain elevators. Chet grinned. They looked like out-of-plane skyscrapers. The following morning dawned clear and sunny. The jetliner left promptly, and after an uneventful trip arrived in Edmonton before noon. The large airport there was busy with flights to and from Alaska, northern Canada, and the United States. Before the Hardys and Chet deplaned, they learned from a stewardess that Edmonton is the focal point of the mining and fur-producing regions of the Arctic. Also, she added, it's a busy agricultural distribution center. The pleasant young woman wished them an enjoyable stay. Then the 3 boys headed for the airport terminal building. After claiming their bag, They taxied to a hotel and checked in. Then Frank said, "Now to visit Mr. Baker Jones." They took a taxi to the Edmonton Hospital. Here they were referred to the head nurse on the second floor. When they inquired about Peter Baker Jones, she said, "I'm sorry, but you can't see him. Mr. Baker Jones is still in a coma. And as I told his other caller, we don't know how long it will be until he regains consciousness, poor man." Wonder who the other caller was. "Other caller," Frank echoed. "Who was it?" "A man named Fenton Hardy," replied the nurse. "He left just a few minutes ago. Dad." Frank and Joe stared at each other. "It couldn't have been," Chet said, "unless your father took the next flight and wasn't stopped by the bad weather." "He never mentioned coming this soon," Frank declared. "There's a phone booth. I'm going to call home and find out about this." Joe and Chet thought it a good idea, and Frank placed the call to Bayport. Mr. Hardy answered the phone. Frank burst out, "I knew you weren't here, Dad." "What do you mean by that?" Mr. Hardy asked with a slight chuckle. "Did you think I was?" "No," Frank replied, and explained one of the head nurses here at Edmonton Hospital told us you had been, and I'm sure many other people heard Fenton Hardy was here too. Dad, some man is impersonating you. He was just here trying to see Baker Jones." "Be very careful," cautioned Mr. Hardy, instantly serious. "I don't know why anyone would pose as me, unless it was to get some further valuable information from the Englishman in connection with the ruined stone." "At least we are tipped off," Frank answered. He assured his father that the boys were all well, explained why the flight had arrived a day late. "Check with the police and try to locate the man who found the ruined stone," the detective suggested. When he learned that the Englishman had not regained consciousness, Frank said goodbye and returned to Chet and Joe. When Joe heard that his father was home, he immediately hurried to the nurse and asked her for a description of Mr. Baker Jones's caller. Her meager description could fit Fenton Hardy or hundreds of other men. "No clue there," he reported to the boys. Discussing their next move, the trio started toward the elevator. "I suppose the best place to get details of the attack on Baker Jones is at police headquarters," Frank said. "Let's go check." The boys were talking excitedly as they rounded the corner of the brightly lighted hall. They collided head-on with a huge brawny figure. "Bon Ture!" he exclaimed in a deep, booming voice. "What's this?" The speaker was a powerful-looking man, well over 6 feet tall. His strong-featured face was covered by a thick black beard, and he wore a red and black checkered wool shirt, dark pants, and heavy lace boots. Joe staggered backward from the impact, bumping against the wall. The stranger reached out a huge hand, grasped Joe by the arm, and steadied him on his feet. "Bon Ture!" he shouted again. And that's where chapter 5 stops, guys. Next chapter we'll be reading chapter 6, Canadian Giant. I hope you guys enjoyed. Bye.